back then my grand aunt and my grand uncle started this company in 1950 in the north of Vietnam, and they produced like a lot of films, a lot of movies back in the day. But what happened was the Vietnam War happened, and a lot of political stuff that went on. And when the country was taken over by the North Vietnamese, that's when they fled the country, and along with them on the fishing boat, like they took some of these films with them to fled over to they travel over to Hong Kong, and after that they settle in the United States. Basically back in I would say 2013, I actually wanted to do the remodeling at my basement. Pretty much, I had no idea about the films at that time at all. But when I went into the basement, and I started smelling like this really strong vinegar smell from the basement, and I didn't know where it came from. Why I choose the Purple Horizon for my first movie to restore? Actually, because when I dug into these canister and I looked at the condition of all these films that I had, it was one of the worst one like you could find. Like, it was in the whole collection. So the condition was like so deteriorated, and there's a term that they call it. It's called the vinegar syndrome, and it would turn the films into like completely purple and black out all the pictures. And when I look at the films, I would see like it's almost like completely purple, so you can't really see what's the content is in there about, because it's losing all its color and all its images. So that's the main reason why I chose the Purple Horizon. The plot is about this young soldier back in the days of the South Vietnamese, that he fell in love with this jazz singer, but then they were separated by the war because he has to be sent to the battlefield. And while she was staying in back home, like, she had to survive by herself, and dealing with a lot of like bullies and a lot of like people, like bad people, like trying to get to her, and a lot of like abusive like relationship that went on. And From Saigon to Điện Biên Phủ is the next movie, because that one has a lot of information online that I could access to. And one of the main actress is still alive, and she's still active in the film industry like here, and she told me a lot of information of how the film was produced back then, with the producer from Hong Kong and Taiwan, and a lot of like Chinese, Hong Kong, Taiwanese actors and actresses were in the movie. So that's when I was able to find a lot of information from that for that film. The main actresses in Saigon to Điện Biên Phủ is Kieu Trinh, and she is one of the most prominent Vietnamese American film actress, that in our community, because she started acting since she was 18, 19 years old. And I think if you might know her from the Joy Luck Club. So she's very famous for that role. The main plot is about it's like a spy drama action kind of movie, where the Chinese communists, like back in the day, try to infiltrate South Vietnam, and South Vietnam then had to collaborate with other central like intelligence from Taiwan and Hong Kong to counter that whatever plot that they were planning in South Vietnam. When people usually, when they talk about Vietnam, talk about South Vietnam, they always refer to the Vietnam War, but then that's not all we had about the history of South Vietnam. The scenes that was going on in the films, it was actually like way before my time, way before I was born. in Saigon, the streets that I was back in Vietnam, and in comparisons, like it just to me like it just seemed like so many, it's just so much crowded now, like just so many, especially like I don't know like if you notice, back in the days like around that time, like in the early 70s, there was like a lot of cars, in the streets, comparing to now like there's just like a lot more like motorcycles on like scooters on the street, or bicycle on the street. Our experience with as a second generation after the war, because I was born and I grew up in Vietnam after the war, and personally we didn't get to watch color television or like color films until I would say like the late 80s. And when I work on these films, and I realized that like how beautiful and how colorful like these films are, like even back in the 1960s. So I would think like, okay, like why didn't we get a chance to watch these movies when I was in Vietnam? Instead of we had like only 2 channels of black and white television to watch. And that's something interesting that I that I realized and I noticed like after all these years.